All right, this tutorial is going to be a quick introduction to material nodes and the materials editor. So if you remember, when we've got an object selected over here, we can go down here. If we see this red ball, that's the symbol for materials. We can see that up here too when we click into material view so that we can actually see what material is set. So right now, this cube has just a basic material with a white color. Now if we add a new object, let's say we add a sphere, and I'll bring that down where we can see it. Right now, that sphere doesn't have a material at all. So I'm going to add a material slot and then create a new material to go in that slot. And we can see a bunch of settings over here for our material. But in order to really create a material from scratch, let's go over into the shading tab. We can see we've got our scene and it's still in material view. But now we've got kind of a background and some light just to give us a good sense of what that material will look like in a real scene. So down here, though, is where we're going to be spending our time. This is the material nodes editor. And nodes are just these little boxes that we can move around and join to each other. So I'm going to get rid of this. And you can see when I delete that, now it has no material at all. So it's just like a black hole. But we can see that the material output has three different things going into it. There's a surface shader, a volume shader, and a displacement. So we can see that here we've got a bunch of different shaders that we can add to the surface or to the volume. So if I add, what we had at the beginning is a principled BSDF. So that's kind of your standard surface shader. And if we hook that up here, that gives us our white color. We can change the base color and can go through all of these different properties to see what they all do. So let's say we want the surface to be kind of like a green glass, but then on the inside we want it to be kind of red and misty. We want to be able to see through. So I'm going to change the render engine to cycles just so that we can see it a little bit better. So right now we've got just that green surface. I'll make it even more green. But then to make it see-through, we need to increase the transmission. So I'm going to increase the transmission. So now we can start to see through that. If I turn down the index of refraction, we can see the corner of our cube through there. It looks a lot like glass, which is good. So now we want the inside, the volume, to be red. So let's add a shader that is a principled volume. And let's change the color of that to red and hook that up to the volume. So since green and red are opposite colors, they're kind of canceling each other out and we're getting a little bit of brown there. But here, let's turn this to yellow. So then if I change the density on the inside, so if I turn it all the way down, we're just getting the surface. But if I turn it up a little bit, then we can get a little bit of that red interior color. So we've got surface shaders, we've got volume shaders. And if I take the surface away, we can see it's just like a red cloud. And if I turn the density down, it can be like a red mist or something like that. So let me connect the surface back up. And I'm going to turn the transmission all the way up so we can see into it really well. And the index of refraction down. Yeah, so we've got our yellow surface, our red interior, and then displacement allows us to actually move the surface around. So if we want to add a vector displacement. So we can do displacement or vector displacement. So this is just like expanding it out from the center, and this is moving it in a particular direction. So if I just do displacement, connect that to there, then if I change the height, you can see, oh, yes. So for the displacement to work, over here in our material settings, we have to scroll down until we get to this settings dropdown, and then change the displacement from bump only to displacement and bump or displacement only. So that, you can see we were actually inside the sphere because it had been displaced so much. And we can do all kinds of neat effects by changing the displacement and by changing all of these properties. You can see each of these has a plugin spot. And instead of going to the add menu, I can also just hit Shift A, and that'll let me add things. So let's say I want to add a texture to my surface. So I'm going to take away the volume and turn the transmission down. So we've just got our solid surface again. Now let's say instead of just a single color, I want that to have a texture. So if I add a texture, let's give it a noise texture. So that's going to just give it kind of random colors, or we could use the factor to give it just random black and white values. We can adjust all these settings to get it exactly how we want it. So then, let's say we want that noise texture to mix with our regular color. So let's add a mix color node. So mix RGB. We want to mix that with the yellow color. So now we've got that noise texture mixed in with our yellow color, and we can use these different nodes to get all kinds of neat effects. Now let's say we wanted our sphere, instead of using the nodes to create a texture for it, let's say we wanted an image to be on our sphere. So let's go ahead and add a texture, and we want an image texture. I'll get rid of these things just to get them out of our way. So I'm going to open up, let's see, what images do I have? Let's just use this poster that I made for Animation Club. So if we connect the color into there, now we can see that that image is wrapping around the object. So we can change how it's projected if we want to project it that way or that way. But if we want more control over how it's projected, we can also use what's called a UV map. So that's what this is over here. If we go into the UV editing, so right now, we can see we've got a grid of points, and that is the grid of points that's on this sphere. And if we, let's say we wanted, instead of having the image wrapped around the sphere like that, we wanted it just projected from a particular direction. So under our UV menu, let's go to project from view. So now our UV map is just a circle because that's what the projection of this looks like. So if I make that bigger, now we can see that we can just project that image onto our UV map however we want. And if you wanted to, there are a bunch of different options here for different ways to UV unwrap. I'll make a separate video on that. Smart UV Project is really good because it gives us different islands to work with, and it just makes it so that it's as undistorted as possible. But for now, let's go with Project from View and scale that up, move that over. So now if we go back to shading, we can see that that image is being projected from this direction. So if I zoom out, you can see the image projected there, and it kind of does funky things as it gets around to the edge because that's how a projection works. It's only coming from one direction. All right, and then the last type of texturing that I want to talk about is texture painting. So now, instead of using an existing image, go ahead and just get rid of that. Let's add an image texture, but then let's just make a new one. So you can change the resolution here and the base color. I suppose I'll change it to yellow since that's the color we've been working with for all of this. All right, so we've got that, and I'm going to plug that into our base color. Now, nothing changed right now, or at least not drastically since it's still just yellow. But if we go back into UV editing, I'm going to Smart Project so that we've got all of our different areas working. And I'll try and scale that up so that we've got as much space to work on as possible. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Texture Paint. We can see our UV map over here and our 3D view over here. So what I can do now is I can actually use a brush to paint on the surface of my object. We can see it shows up on the UV map over here. So I can use that to create a texture from scratch rather than having to pull in an image from somewhere else. So those are a few of the different things you can do with materials. There will be more that we can talk about later in terms of like using math to create different effects and what it means to give a normal direction to things. But for now, I think that's a good summary of the different types of textures that we can create and the different material properties that are available.